evening, Dr. Rowley, and thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me today on behalf of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me, and I'm very happy that you're here.
Thank you. I want us to get straight into it because there are a number of things that we would like to cover in this interview. We are coming out of a very joyous period in this country, heading into another one. It's pretty much a festive time, going into Carnival, a lot of jubilation. But I think one of the things that may be hanging over the heads of citizens remains that major problem, that being of crime. Has your government failed on the issue of crime? Well,
we have not made the level of progress that the citizens expect and demand and are entitled to, because we are in fact facing an ongoing crime wave, and we aren't alone in this. Today I was looking at the Caribbean situation, and it's fairly widespread, but we have been engaging it. We've made some progress, but not as much as is required, and we will continue to engage.
I ask this, do you think you and your administration may have underestimated the task at hand? And I say this in the context of some of the statements that were made in the 2015 manifesto. The former administration was criticized when crime crossed 400. We've seen under your leadership and the current leadership that crime has crossed the 500 figure. It's 538 last year, which is one of the second highest on record. So did you underestimate what it may have taken to get the crime situation under control?
I think the entire country is underestimating the threat that is posed by the criminal element. But as we expressed ourselves in our manifesto, we were expressing the optimism of the effort that we intended to make, expecting that those efforts will bear the kind of fruit that the circumstances require. You may recall that the famous Keaton Well 136, that was when the population was being revolted by 136 murders. But the country has been engaged in this chronic fight for that long. Till now we are talking about reducing 500 to 400 as success. So this is bigger than just an estimate in the manifesto.
Are you satisfied so far with the performance of Minister Stuart Young handling the national security portfolio?
He has a very, very difficult job, and I'm satisfied that he's making the effort that's required, but there's always room for improvement, and we all, in every ministry, are aiming to have that improvement made.
We saw Minister Edmund Dillon. He was the previous Minister of National Security. Some may say that he was removed when the murder toll was not being reduced in a way that was satisfactory. Do you foresee that Minister Young will remain in that portfolio heading into 2020?
I don't see a ministerial change now as a response. I think Minister Young, the energy that he brings and the dedication, it's what is required, working with his team. And much of the progress that we have made by bringing the agencies to focus and to work as a team, Minister Young can take credit for doing that.
One of the things your administration has also done was the appointment of a permanent police commissioner. Are you satisfied with the performance of Gary Griffith as one of the agents in tackling the criminal element?
Yes, because what was missing from the police effort, that being the agency responsible for securing the population and responding directly to the criminal element, was that you required leadership. And in the absence of a substantive commissioner of police, there was an absence of leadership in the police service, and we've dealt with that, and to date we are satisfied that that leadership is being brought to bear on the problem that we're trying to solve.
Do you think the crime situation is the one that will, in a sense, define the 5 years of your administration in terms of the government's failure to reduce crime in a way that is meaningful or meaningful to citizens of this country?
It would not be fair to the government to be measured by this situation, which didn't arise overnight, and it's not a feature of this administration. It's not a feature of Trinidad and Tobago. Crime and criminality as a a responsibility of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, governments of the Caribbean, and I dare say wider field, is going to remain a major focus. And while we would not have eliminated or even reduced murders as we have embarked upon, there are a lot of other things that the government has been successful at. So I would hope that the population will judge us on the broader canvas than on this chronic problem that we are grappling with.
And those are some of the things that we intend to address in this interview, but the crime situation really is one of those foremost things that affects the lives of citizens. I want to just recall a statement that you made. You said if you're not part of the solution, then you are, if the government is not part of the solution, then it is part of the problem. Do you stand by that statement? And in that context, is the government then part of the problem?
Providing that the government is making the effort that is required to respond. If the government is not making that effort in whatever way that could be determined to be that, then of course the government is part of the problem. But if the government is making the reasonable efforts, and in some instances going beyond reasonable efforts to fight with the problem, then I don't know that you would say that the government is part of the problem. For example, in recent days, we have had a number of murders related to domestic situations. While these form part of the statistics, the role of the government in those specific instances, eliminating those incidents, is minimal, but they do form part of the wider societal problem. Right? And that is a part of the whole crime scene that we're looking at.
Yeah. And now is a good time because we have seen, since the beginning of the year, we've had 3 women die in cases that are suspected to be domestic related. What would your message be to women? You've spoken on this issue before, you've come under some criticism for it, but now is a good time, I think, to send a message to our women. What would you say to them?
My message is not to the women today. My message would be to the men. And that is, in these domestic situations, that I would want to appeal to the men of the nation, the males of the nation, to have an expectation that all our women require the love that you have for your mother and your sister. And that should be measured starting with respect. And if you think along those lines, then you would want to stay away from treating with domestic failures by violent responses. And I would like to appeal to the men of Trinidad and Tobago that if your relationships are going bad, focus on the pleasant memories of when the relationship was good and wish your partner well going forward, especially if you have children in the mix. And that should guide you away from this horrendous violence that these men mete out to the women who are the victims of this violence.
So we've seen some horrific crimes for the year, some of them unexplained, not necessarily related to gangs or to drugs and so on. That family up in the east that was hogtied and their throats reportedly slit. When these things happen, there are calls for the resumption of the death penalty. Under your administration, we know that the former AG Ramesh Lawrence Mirage had been brought in to assist the government in expediting that process. Can you give an update to the citizens as to where that is?
It's a legal process that is full of all kinds of impediments along the way. The bottom line against the country's ability to carry out the death penalty, which is the wish of the wider national population, is that there are 2 cultures here. There's a culture in Britain that is opposed to the death penalty. Sure. And there's a culture in Trinidad and Tobago which is extremely violent, and where the population requires that the death penalty, as on the books of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, be carried out. But the process of getting it done, there are obstacles along the way. You're familiar with the famous Pratt & Morgan.
Yeah.
I was talking to the Attorney General a couple of days ago about the country's inability to meet these deadlines. And I am being advised that even in situations where the process is required to be advanced in the system, there are people who are taking decisions which can only have the effect of delaying the process. And that's where the cultural problem exists. I mean, yesterday in India, the government of India carried out the death penalty on a number of people who were involved in horrendous crimes against women, incidentally. And Indians are able to do that because they are not subject to second guessing of other cultures. And India is the largest democracy in the Commonwealth. Right. And nobody could accuse India of acting improperly. But Trinidad and Tobago, we are trapped in this legal conundrum of trying to get it done from a culture that is violently opposed to the death penalty. And our highest court is in London.
Well, that brings me to another point. In 2015, when you were asking the citizens to elect you to office, the PNM presented a 10-point crime plan. And one of the measures announced in that plan was the ascension to the Caribbean Court of Justice as this country's final appellate court. That has not happened, as well as a number of other measures in that 10-point crime plan.
Most of the other measures we've dealt with. This matter of the Caribbean Court of Justice is a political matter. The PNM does not have the votes in the parliament to make those changes. And engaging in that is engaging in politics. The UNC has made it quite clear that they are not prepared to support it. As a matter of fact, when they were in government, they made a half-hearted attempt to have civil matters brought as originating matters at the CCJ. But until the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago has the votes to make the change, it is just so much political talk. Right. It's a political matter. Everybody knows the PNM's position on the matter, that we support the CCJ, and we were quite in the opposition. We were prepared to provide the votes for it to be done. But we do not have the votes in the Parliament to do it, and then so we don't waste time arguing with the others who say they're not going to do it. But it is something that the population will keep engaged on, and maybe sometime in the future, the Parliament would be in a position to take a decision on it, but we are not in that position now.
Is a referendum a consideration on this?
A referendum does not change the votes in the Parliament, because if the party taking part in the referendum say, we are not going to support it, referendum will give you a underpinning of the population's position that the death penalty should be carried out. It will confirm it, I'm pretty sure. But that does not mean that the people who are in Parliament to vote, if they say we are not going to vote for it, then the referendum wouldn't change anything, and there's no requirement in our law for a referendum.
Mm. So under your administration, the Attorney General has spoken extensively about pieces of legislation that have been brought in to address the crime situation in this country, and there have been a number of other measures that have been put in place. Realistically, for citizens who are scared, who are concerned about the crime situation in this country, realistically, when do you think they can expect some easing of the violence that we are seeing in this country? Have you set timelines for yourself?
The one thing that we hold out that would bring improvements in that kind of time frame, or any time frame that you may want to pick, is the speedy delivery of justice. One of the contributors to the culture of violence and the crime expedition on the part of individuals who choose crime as a way of life or an incident in their experience is that it takes so long for justice to be meted out to persons who have violated the trust of the population. What we have done, we've made a lot of legal changes, improved the legal infrastructure, and now in the months and weeks ahead, you will see significant speeding up of the delivery of justice in Trinidad and Tobago, because we have taken steps to increase the judiciary's capacity to bring trials forward. You would see us moving out of the waterfront into the Parliament. That will have fundamental effects on this speeding up of justice, because a number of all the civil courts will now go to that building down there, freeing up a number of courts in the Hall of Justice where only criminal matters will be dealt with. We have increased the number of judicial officers so that we can now treat with more cases in a shorter space of time. And we've decriminalized the use of marijuana. We've taken traffic matters out of the court from traffic offenses to violations, removing these matters from the treatment in the court as a trial. This means that criminal matters will more easily come to trial and be dealt with in a shorter space of time. And once justice is being delivered in a shorter space of time, that will have the effect of dampening the free time that these people have when they commit crimes in 10, 15, 20 years, your matter is not dealt with. And that certainly will have the effect of causing people to know that if justice is sure to come your way in a realistic frame of mind, you will think differently.
So, in terms of your own expectations and hope, have you set yourself a particular time frame where if the crime situation does not reduce, and if you are given a second term in office, this is an election year, what actions will you take in terms of the people who are in charge of handling the crime situation?
Well, certainly we're not going to be operating on a musical chairs basis. The people who are in charge, once the effort that they're making is the effort that is required under the circumstances, then it's not a personality matter. It's a situational matter. And I don't know that I can give you a date, but I can tell the population that given what we have done, given what we have invested in, both in terms of human capital, legal resources, and of course we have other resources coming, including improving our ability to secure our borders. All of those things together, no one thing is the answer, but all of them working together in the coming weeks, months, and years ahead should give the population some comfort that in a reasonable time frame, we should be seeing some improvement in our circumstance responding to the criminal element. Because the vast majority of people in Trinidad and Tobago are decent, law-abiding citizens. It is a small population in Trinidad and Tobago that is engaging in criminal conduct, that is causing an environment of fear from crime and being exposed to crime. That is what we're dealing with. And once we have succeeded in operating our national security agencies, not in silos, but as teams. That's what we're doing now. We've appointed a commissioner of police. We're strengthening the police service. People are saying that they're seeing some changes in the police service. That is true. We continue along that right direction. We improve our borders. We improve our courts. And of course, we get into the family system through the social services arrangements and our schools. And together, all of these should give the country comfort that we are going in the right direction, and that should give us the outcome that we are after.
All right. I want us to move on to the issue of the economy. We've seen the latest central bank and IMF data suggesting that we may not necessarily see growth for 2019. Earlier this year, though, the finance minister stated that the economy had turned around. Is the government being honest with citizens when it says that the economy has turned around? Well,
the data in Trinidad and Tobago is not entirely satisfactory. And the adjusting and readjusting of data leave us in a situation where at one point, if you use data that is available to you at that time, you could come to a particular conclusion, and then when the data is corrected, you get a different picture. But by and large, we at the level of the government, remember, we started out talking about an economy collapsing, and we were facing this this collapse of an economy in 2015, 2016. I don't know if you would have observed. In 2013, the size of this economy was $174 billion, the GDP, yeah. Right? 2013. By 2016, given our loss of input into the economy from various sources, that economy had shrunk to $140 billion. It wasn't this government's. It was the country losing in areas where we were earning. Now we are up to about 158, almost 160 billion. So we are going in the right direction. And that is what we need to be concerned about.
But is it fair to attach the size of the economy to declines, for example, in the energy sector, when some economists may argue that we are no longer we are not in terms of crude oil, that's not where our business is anymore. So is our economy based then on that? And is it fair to attach it, the growth, the size of the economy?
Well, the figure I just quote is not only energy. That's the size of the overall economy. Yeah. That's our economy. And like it or not, oil and gas are the major contributors to the drivers of our economy. There are a lot of conversations as to what we should have done when we were children, what we should have done in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Those are nice conversations. But in terms of what we're dealing with now and what we are grappling with now, the economy of Trinidad and Tobago is largely driven by its fortunes in oil and gas. And unfortunately, this period is not a good period, hasn't been a good period since 2014. And we just have to manage our affairs responsibly and focus on getting the best out of those inputs from hydrocarbon, as well as focusing on other areas that can add to the basket of this basket which you call the GDP.
Well, some people may question whether we're focusing heavily enough on some of those areas, but I wanted to just, for our viewers' perspective. So we've seen, based on the central bank data, a contraction in the energy sector. That was expected based on where energy prices are now, but we've also seen contractions in the manufacturing sector as well.
It's not just prices, it's volumes. Because if the price is low and you have a large volume, your earnings can be improved. Our problem, and the problem that this government has been grappling with ever since we came into office, was low price and low volume. We've made some improvements on the volume side, but not sufficient. When we came into office, the volume of gas being produced was 3.1 billion a day. We need 4 billion. That means we were 900 million scuff short. We have been working on that, and whatever you think of the lopsidedness of the economy and the overdependence on energy, we had to work on that because that is where the earning was. We've now got up to about 3.75, something like that, which is still well below the 4 billion that we need, but we are well away from 3.1 billion. And we have to keep doing that. And we have been doing that, and we've got considerable success with that. With the question of oil, the same thing. We're down to about 60,000 barrels a day, 63,000 barrels. Now, we have to improve on that, and that is what caused us to treat with the Petrotrin situation in the way that we have done, and we are beginning to see results, positive results there. Yeah.
Petrotrin is something we want to discuss, I think, a little more extensively, but on the point of the non-energy sector, so manufacturing sector has seen a 2.5% decline. We've also seen the construction sector at about 3.5% decline for 2019. And the feeling is that not enough is being done to encourage growth in the non-energy sector in this country.
Well, when you look at those numbers, one could come to that conclusion, must come to that conclusion, but then you're facing what exactly are we required to do, and do those things. But when you do those things, in every situation, there's no guarantee that you will get the immediate success that you're after, because much of these things are not immediate. It's disappointing that we have had a reduction. Sometimes there are external market influences, other times not enough local effort. In a culture that is risk averse, you don't get the kind of response that you may be after to make the kinds of changes or take the kind of plunges that should be made to bring about that kind of change that you're looking for.
You've spoken extensively about the government's ability to stabilize the economy. We've been hearing about, taking it out of what you describe as a crisis situation into stability. When will the government kick it into the next gear? Because stabilization is not providing, I guess, the level of economic activity that people are expecting, and we'll talk about the unemployment rate in just a bit. But when will we see the economy kick into the next gear?
Well, every budget that we've presented had within it a development program of some sort. But we have had to stabilize it. But we've been successful there. Our inflation rate of 1% is not to be sneezed at. Our unemployment rate, even though a lot of that employment is government support for unemployables, is down at approximately 4%, 3.5% to 4%. That is not to be dismissed because it could easily have been 12 or 18% as we've had before. We've had double-digit unemployment in this country before.
But the current figures do not take into account, based on what the central bank is saying, for layoffs at Petrotrin, layoffs in the telecom sector, for example, and other layoffs that may go unreported. So it is likely that the unemployment figure could be slightly higher.
Well, let's bear in mind that, you mentioned the Petrotrin situation. We had an option to maintain the status quo, a status quo that could not have been afforded, right? So I don't know what is to be had by saying that you'd have to take that as different. It's not different, it's all part of one mix. Because by taking the action we took at Petrotrin, it prevented us from being in a worse position. Right? And that is the fact. If we had gone ahead and not dealt with the Petrotrin situation, and the Minister of Finance found himself having to be the paymaster to the Petrotrin demands, then the outcome of that could easily have been an IMF program. And that is when we would have been discussing real unemployment. Understand? So we have staved off a worst case scenario, but where we are at is not a best case.
So you've introduced the Petrotrin discussion. We will go in that direction for now and return to the issue of the economy itself. You are standing by the decision to shut down the Petrotrin refinery. There are some experts who say that Petrotrin required serious overhaul, yes, but it did not require a shutting down, of the refinery because of the socio-economic impact it would have had on some of the southern communities, some of which we are feeling now.
Well, we did not arrive at this decision overnight or capriciously. As we said before, it took us a year and a half of serious investigative work, looking at options, and in the end, the option that made the most sense was to restructure the company. And if we had the time this afternoon, we could go into the detail. But in short, it is the restructuring of the company that allowed the company to refinance its debt without passing that debt as a burden onto the Minister of Finance, which allowed the Minister of Finance to do what we have done in education, in health, in national security, in a development program, which you're taking for granted now, and which is being poo-pooed by others as not being enough. But imagine if the Minister of Finance had to carry the Petrotrin debt as a government liability and was not able to do what we have done in the other areas. It would have been a far worse situation. The restructuring gave us the benefit of the restructured company being able to take care of its debt and avoid the Ministry of Finance having to take that debt and result in a downgrade of the country. That restructuring, which is easily called the closing down of Petrotrin, we didn't close down Petrotrin. We restructured the company. There is Petrotrin as the parent company, still being there, being dealt with, and we still have liabilities there, and we have to find a way to treat those liabilities. But in the restructuring, we created heritage to do what Petrotrin's core business was, which is look for oil, find oil, sell oil at a profit. We're doing that. We had a good first year. Paria had to be formed because we have to supply the nation with fuel. We've done that, and they're doing that successfully in the short to medium term. The restructuring is working. But there were downsides to it, and the downsides is that we had to reduce the labor force. The option of restructuring without doing that is like saying that you were going to diagnose without prescribing the medicine. However, we are expecting that improvements will come along the way to take the pressure off those who were directly affected. And understand something else too. In that restructuring, $2.7 billion were made immediately available to those who were affected at Petrotrin. So don't make it sound as if it was a collapse where everybody was thrown on the pavement and left to scramble. Right? $2.7 billion in cash payments were made out. And that is what happens when you do this kind of restructuring in the way that we've done it. Support in one end and a future of possibilities of profitability in a restructuring engine.
Just one final thing on that before we go to the status of where the OWTU patriotic bid is right now. We've heard Mr. Speedy said he did not advise the government to shut down, or you don't like that particular term, but to the current method that was taken. He did not necessarily recommend that. What were some of the other options on the table?
Where did you get that from?
He said in an interview that he did not advise the government to shut down the refinery.
I can't stand by that statement. Everything the government did with respect to the restructuring of Petrotrin was done lockstep with the board of Petrotrin coming to the government and giving the government all its options. And there was a subcommittee of the cabinet that eventually came to this position, and the cabinet took a position. So I would be very surprised if what you're saying there is accurate. That board that Mr. Speedy chaired, that board with his members, they did human service in bringing the country to a position to be able to take that decision. As far as I am aware, the chairman and his board were in step with what we have done. And in fact, it has been done in a way that was much better than most people expected that it could have been done. And therefore the board should have been congratulated for the work that they did, even though there were the negatives that were associated with that particular kind of economic adjustment that took place there.
On the issue of the refinery itself, did the government play some politics in the selection of Patriotic, which is an agency of the OWTU, in selecting them as the preferred bidder to take over the operations of the refinery?
No, there's no politics involved here. There's no politics involved in the Petrotrin situation. This is a straight survival case where national downgrade, right? National financial collapse is what we were facing. This government didn't have the option to kick the can down the road because the check was due in August 2019. Even if we wanted to play games, we couldn't. However, let us look at how we arrived at that position. We did the restructuring, and in the restructuring, we had to close the refinery because the refinery was the major money loser. We were importing over 100,000 barrels of oil per day and losing up to $7 a barrel per day. That was a statement of fact. When we did that, and it was announced to the country, we said to Petrotrin in front of the country, if you think it's good business that you can get involved in, we'll give you the first option.
Correct.
We did that even before anybody else had the option to look at the prospect of continuing an operation at that refinery, with a commitment from the government that they will be given the first option. Petrotrin was, OWTU was given the first option. Well, they did so, and they came to us with a response. We also said, by a second address by me as Prime Minister, however, your response has to stand the rigors of serious business analysis. When that analysis was done on their first option, it was found not to be satisfactory. But we did say to them, you will now also be allowed to come back when others come at a later date. You too will be allowed to put another submission in. They went away, they did their work, they came back in, and the government, by way of a team that was separately put there to analyze it, that team analyzed all the bids, which eventually came down to only 3 serious bids. And of course, if you look at one bidder wanted the refinery virtually for free, another bidder was saying that they will pay us a small amount of money over time but take no wider responsibility. It was the OWTU's bid alone that gave us the option to have the refinery reopened in the way that they have offered. And we accepted that bid in a proper process that they turned up in as the best bid.
At what stage of the process are we now?
We're at the stage now where, having accepted them as the preferred bidder, they were asked to go away and come back with the commitments, because you could say you're going to do something and it sounds good, but we need to know that what you say you are going to do, you can do, and that your partners are in fact committed to the process that you have offered the state. And they went away, and we are at the stage now where in the next few weeks we would be in a position to accept and commit or reject and move on. But they've
so
done
we should get a response very soon.
Yes, that aspect of the work has been done. I was told a few days ago that there's a meeting to be had, I think next week, with the inputs that the OWTU had offered, their partnership and so on, and to demonstrate their ability to do the funding and to provide what is required. Because understand something, this refinery reopening is not a simple matter.
We're aware.
Right.
It could cost very well close to $1 billion to get it restarted.
And that is why the state had been very upfront in giving the OWTU whatever relief they could have been given to proceed along that line. Right? Because what they offered to pay for it up front, you would remember that the Minister of Finance said, okay, rather than have to find that money up front now, to make it easier for you, we will give you a moratorium.
Absolutely. But how do you mitigate against concerns that this was an attempt to balm over some of the anger over the refinery closure, and also that the government had embarked on what some have described as union busting?
No, those are just old talk. We had a problem that had to be addressed. Arriving out of it were people who were dissatisfied, particularly the people who were involved in what Petrotrin represented. That is understandable. We empathize with that, and that is why we have gone the way we have gone. And to make sure that we are doing things which will give us the option to ameliorate the effects of what we have done. But what we have done is something that had to be done for the wider national community. Right? So no, those who don't support the government's measure, we expect them to put it in the worst possible light. But what was the option? What was the alternative? And you know the interesting thing about it? There are officials who served in government before and shied away from these decisions. But they're the ones up front making critical comments, but not telling you what the other option was, because there are always other options, you know. We had an option of leaving Petrotrin in place to lose $2,000 million a year and not be able to pay its debt. And of course, if we defaulted on a loan like that, the default of all the other national loans come facing you, and then what is our position? There's something called cross default. If you borrow money from 10 people, and then it turns out that one day you can't pay one, and the other 9 say, I want my money now because you have defaulted. That's the way they want us to be. And that's what is facing this government. We had to steer ourselves away from that. And in doing so, in a population of 1.4 million people or thereabouts, the business and livelihood of 5,000 people is important. But it is not the only consideration of the government.
Sure. So you're saying that this was not done in an attempt to balm over the anger over the refinery closure. Fine. What happens
if... But it can't be both. It can't be you accuse me of union busting when we take the action that is inimical to what the union thinks is its interest, and then in the next breath you accuse me of pandering to the union. Can't be both.
If the OWTU is rejected, what happens after that?
Well,
is there a second buyer?
No, we don't have anybody on the table. If what the OWTU has offered is found not to be acceptable, in the end, we're going to end up with refinery number 18 that does not have an operator. There are 17 other refineries in the world today that its business was such that they had to go out of business, and they too are there. Some of them thinking about finding someone to restart it, others with no hope of restart. Our refinery came to a position where we had to take that decision. And it is not a decision taken lightly, and it's a serious matter, and we're hoping that we can come to an agreement which will bring about some use of the facility.
I want to return quickly to the economy because we do have some other things to address, and particularly the issue of the US currency in particular, foreign currency. There are many who will argue, economists, that our economy, it is overvalued, the currency is currently overvalued, right? Why has the government taken the current position it's taken on it in not allowing a free float?
Because the government understands very clearly the effect that a free float will have on the wider national community, especially those people who are not owners or holders of foreign currency. If devaluation is the option chosen by the government, there are certain downsides to devaluation, increased cost of living for people in the country. And of course, it will not give us any more US dollars. But devaluation does not give you more US dollars. What it does, it raises the cost in local dollars for people who are buying largely in an environment where a lot of your purchases are imported items.
There are many importers and retailers who will tell you, Dr. Rowley, that they are purchasing US currency on the black market at prices above what exists in the economy. So that, in essence, some of those costs are already being passed on to some of the most vulnerable in society.
Yeah, but how much of the economy is that? How much? The central bank, right? The central bank puts and supports the exchange rate as it is now by putting state-owned US dollars into the system. In countries where the government does not have a supply of foreign currency, how do they make out? We have an industry here that brings a rent into the treasury. Barbados doesn't have that. Jamaica doesn't have that. So people do find ways outside of the normal exchange rate to do things. But that is not the economy. We don't have a black market economy in Trinidad and Tobago. We have some elements of black marketing, I'm sure. But what we do have is a currency supported largely by government's earnings. And what we have to do is to determine what are the priorities that that foreign exchange will be used for. We have to buy medicine. We have to pay public debt. We have to buy food that we import and only want to eat, imported food. Those things are paid for by foreign currency. Yeah. And a devaluation does not increase the amount of foreign currency you have.
But how long can the government continue to sustain the system that is currently in place?
Let me answer that with a question. How long can the government protect the wider national community from the ravages of high and runaway prices? Because that's what it is. You devalue the currency, and basically you're saying you're impoverishing people who today, a Trinidad and Tobago dollar can get you 1 ounce. Devaluation comes about, and you get half ounce. That's what it is. Those who have access to foreign currency are the beneficiaries of a devaluation. And some of the voices that you hear calling for devaluation, they know why they're calling for devaluation. It is not in defense of Mr. Trinidad and Tobago. A devaluation overnight could hand them more millions of Trinidad and Tobago dollars.
It is not just...
And of course, I happen to know that that is a strong part of that consideration. And there are those who tell you it's arithmetic. If you devalue, you get more Trinidad and Tobago dollars, and therefore you pay your bills and you're hunky-dory. We don't agree with that.
So one final thing on this. Your administration promised to reintroduce an auction system that existed at the central bank prior to you coming into office. I think it was removed under the former administration, where banks would bid for a certain amount of foreign currency. Why has that not yet been reintroduced?
I don't know that that was a commitment to reinstate that. What we had criticized the effect of that
the changing of the system.
That change, which had shocked. It gave a shock to a system that was working. From the time, you see, the valuation and those kinds of things is like spinning a wheel. Once the wheel begins to turn, it then is difficult to bring it back to a stationary state. And that is what happened with that. Because for years, the currency and devaluation was not a part of the consideration. But there was this argument that some people were being favored and some were not. And the governor of the central bank brought in other people into sharing it. And that created problems that could not be easily reversed. And what we did, though, we tried to make sure that foreign exchange goes to the area where it can make the best contribution to the manufacturing sector. So we started to make foreign exchange available through the Export-Import Bank. Yeah. And only yesterday, the cabinet increased the amount of monies that are being made there, because...
By how much?
I don't want to guess, but I know we increased it.
Sure.
But the pilot project has been working, and we have been making more available, so that those who are making best use of foreign exchange to produce for export, that they are not starved.
I want to move on to some other topics, Dr. Rowley. We are having this interview here in Whitehall. A restoration program has just been completed, as there have been some others on some of the other magnificent 7 structures. Some may argue that, or question, how do you necessarily justify some of the millions that are being spent on these buildings when there are other simpler needs of citizens in this country?
You will always have needs for all kinds of things. And there are things that you have to do. Again, I like to talk about options. What is the option? These buildings are virtually priceless, bequeathed to us at independence. To not maintain them or to restore them is to end up in a place where they would have become of no value. That is not the option we chose. We chose to find the resources to ensure that this value is retained for all times. In talking about how the money could have been used, I want you to bear in mind that much of the money spent to bring this building to where it is from where it was is money paid to people who got jobs doing it. Earnings. I gave the details right here a few weeks ago of how many millions went into people's pockets. Because when people talk about jobs, you hire somebody to do something for which they are paid. You don't just give them money. If you give them money, it's welfare or social support. We do that too. But in the case of all these buildings, about 40% of the millions we hear being spent were jobs that were created, hundreds of jobs, and for which people were paid and for which they were a lot better off. Now that these buildings have been completed, we have the issue now. Where are the jobs for these people who were working here? Where will they now turn? That's why we maintain, even though we are having to borrow money in a reduced environment of spending, we have to have a development program to make sure that jobs in construction, which are about the easiest jobs to create, that those opportunities are there. And at the end of the day, we do a number of things, not the least of which is that we prevent these heritage buildings from deteriorating to a point where we lose them.
What would you say then is the value to someone who may not see the value in a building like this, who may find it difficult, for example, to find a bed at a hospital, or who may not necessarily have food to provide for their children? The poverty rate in this country is at about 24.5%. How do you justify the value of these buildings to some people like that?
Well, not every aspect of life is one that you can touch and feel and put a dollar value on. And these are populations' cultural appreciation of itself is as important as the car to drive in or the food on the plate. And the same, I can tell you, the same way you will find someone who will say, I should have been given that in the form of a bed or a meal. There are many people who say, I feel a sense of pride and satisfaction that my country has been able to save these buildings, because these intangibles are important to the human being.
Let's talk about the demonetization of the $100 bill. The government has gotten some criticism for the time, in particular in which it decided to roll out this measure. Very busy Christmas season. People were concerned about the impact it would have had on business in particular at a time when many of them benefit from, and that may have constrained them a bit. Why that time, and how do you treat with that particular criticism about government's timing?
No time would have been the perfect time for everybody. Whenever we did it, you would have had that conversation. It's not the right time. It's Carnival, it's Easter, it's August, it's Christmas. The activity at Christmas time, as a matter of fact, meshed quite well with the changeover, because a lot of money which otherwise may not have been brought into the economy came in. I can tell you, a lot of people who comment in the way you've just mentioned don't really have all the facts. Maybe they aren't expected to have it. But the facts are that many business houses will tell you that they had surprisingly good sales this year, which they attributed to persons spending money which otherwise would not have been spent.
But there's also the issue of the inconvenience of ordinary elderly citizens in this country.
There would always have been some element of inconvenience and disturbance because you were being called upon to do something that you were not otherwise going to plan to do on that occasion, which is if you have money in your possession and you want to keep money in your possession and you are asked or required to exchange that money, you may have to leave home, you may have to join a line, you may have to send somebody, and that was going to be there. It was not what it was made out to be. As a matter of fact, the process now has largely ended. It is only now going on at the central bank for persons who had extraordinary position. And I must tell you, insofar as this process has gone in Trinidad and Tobago, it has gone remarkably well, remarkably smoothly, and very successful.
So we've seen some very interesting stories coming out of the demonetization of the old $100 bill. What has the government gleaned about the crime capital and money laundering in this country?
We have gleaned that the exercise was worth it, it was necessary, and that we are now in a much better position to treat with elements of white-collar crime, to treat with elements of general criminality across the country, and of course, as a matter of national security and other considerations, that the currency of Trinidad and Tobago is now playing a better part than it was playing, let's say, a month ago.
Who are some of the players involved based on what you've seen? Without identifying anyone.
I am not going to be the one carrying that conversation. The government is a wider canvas. There are other members in the government. There's national security, there's a minister of finance, there's a central bank, there's social services and so on. Sure. I would leave those conversations. But I tell you one thing, as chairman of the National Security Council and also Prime Minister, two things go together. I am absolutely satisfied that this decision was necessary in Trinidad and Tobago. And while there were some elements of disturbance and inconvenience, the benefits far outweigh the inconvenience that some people would have experienced. Because I don't know if the average person in our country has a proper understanding of certain elements of the day-to-day life and the level of unacceptable behavior of some of our citizens.
Dr. Rowley, without being very specific, can you explain to them in a way that they may better understand some of what you have seen so that they understand why they may have gone through this period of some inconvenience?
Well, as I say, we packaged it in the condition of national security. And matters of national security don't lend themselves easily to discourse. And I would wait until we get all the numbers in so we could see what exactly happened and then speak to that.
Sure.
Yeah?
The decriminalization of marijuana was something that government introduced this year. The legislation was passed and we expect that there will be further legislation to take the process a little further. There was some flip-flopping on your part about whether or not government was going to move ahead with this in about 2016 and 2018. You said it was not the priority of the government at the time. That was when CARICOM was moving ahead with it. You said it was not a government priority at the time, but it has happened. What are your feelings on how...
My priority in 2016, 2017 was making sure that we had contracts in place to ensure that the energy sector in Trinidad and Tobago didn't collapse. My priority then was making sure that we could pay for the medicine that goes into the hospitals. My priority was making sure that the main hospital block in the country, in the Port of Spain General Hospital, that as fate would have it, surprisingly survived a 6.8 earthquake, that we are in a position now to be building a new block there. My priority was in making sure that we could reduce our expenditure from where it was unsustainably put at $60 billion to $50 billion. So when I speak about priority, it was in that context. Sure. I know there were those who were extremely agitated that the regional conversation, the international conversation was that we must now decriminalize or legalize marijuana. Yes, but we didn't wake up every day thinking that was where our lifeblood was. We gave the commitment then that we'll get to it. And we got to it. We did say that we'll do it by the middle of 2019, June was the time we had given. But when we looked at the priorities of what had to go through the Parliament, and we also maintained that we would consult quite widely before we took that option. And we did that, and by the end of the year, the legislation was done, and we have decriminalized marijuana for all the benefits we have described, not the least of which is bringing about greater efficiencies in the court and process system.
Have you ever smoked marijuana, Dr. Rowley?
No, sir.
I
lived in Jamaica for 3 years. I lived next to Papine and Augustin. It was never my ambition. It is not my ambition. And I'll say one thing as we do this interview. Decriminalization has made marijuana more easily available without penalty for our population. I want to appeal particularly to our young people, especially those easily influenced at the high school level, that marijuana smoking is not to be recommended. It is classified for good reason under the heading of dangerous drug. The decriminalization comes under the Dangerous Drug Act. And it is a dangerous drug, and it could harm you. Let us start with that. There are benefits to not making it a criminal offense. It does not mean that you go interfering with it. Because I have had first-hand experience of persons who have ruined their lives on marijuana as they have done on alcohol and as they have done on cigarettes. So the fact that we have decriminalized marijuana is not a license to go and burn as many acres as you could and say, well, it's a free up. We are not jailing you for having 30 grams or under 60 grams, but we are not encouraging you because it is a dangerous drug. And the conversation about its medical use, okay, great.
That will come.
So is opium. The opioids have medical use, but that doesn't mean that you don't understand that it's dangerous.
One other point on this, the decriminalization came very in a local government election here in about the vicinity of. It is likely that the remaining parts of the legislation that deal with things like licenses and so on will come this year. In the lead up as well to a potential general election. Were those things, the timing, considered
Absolutely
around
not.
some of those
Absolutely
events?
not. As a matter of fact, we did not program any of this in the context of any election. Because let's face it, in a 5-year term, you've just come out of a general election. It will take some time to get the work done, to get the legislation approved and through the parliament. So that's some time. You have a local government election, 2 of them in this term, and of course a general election. So it's very likely that much of what you will do, if you are inclined to see things as election things, let me tell you how I see it. Anything that the government does that could be deemed to be for election purposes, I would say, is good. Because it means that you are seeing some benefit to be had for something well done. Otherwise, you wouldn't say it's for election.
So we're talking about the general election. We expect that there will be one this year. Do you have a date as yet in your head?
Yes, I have a date, 2020. And of course, the elections are due. That's no secret. We have 5-year terms. And the election would be called when the election is due. And there are processes by which we do that. And I've never shied away from that. I mean, I'm not one of those persons who believe that an election is the be-all and end-all of the country's life. It's a process. Only yesterday I was seeing some recommendation from one of the experts that we should have election every 18 months. And I say, yeah, right. After the first 2 or 3 of those, you know what's the answer going to be? We're tired of elections. We've had elections in 95, 2000, 2001. You remember that?
Yeah.
And the country had literally got tired of elections because you were just coming out of one, going into another one. So elections are part of our process of governing the country. And we are going to treat it as such.
I don't expect you to share the date with me, but I was just wondering whether or not you've thought of dates that you might want to call the election on.
There are lots of options. Lots of options. But I don't think that we should focus on surviving for elections. There are many more important things. Yeah. And before we get to the election date, there's a whole lot that we have to do between now and then.
So, want to talk about what the government's agenda is for 2020, leading into a general election, it being your last year for this term. But one of the campaign promises that you made in 2015 was to ensure that there would have been campaign finance laws enacted before we go to a general election. Are you able to commit to saying that that will happen?
We have draft legislation, which we think we should be able to put in the Parliament sometime in the early part of this year. But of course, that legislation would require a certain amount of collaboration and cooperation in the Parliament, and it's going to have to be discussed in the nation as such. So we will do something. I'm not sure yet exactly what it's going to be, right, or how it's going to play, because my colleagues may have a different view on it. And again, it may fall to the government to act decisively on its own, because unlike what is being said, we do have election legislation in the country. Sure. It's just that it's antiquated. And what we
Which is what the process is aiming to address.
Yes. So if we get cooperation, we could go far. If we don't get cooperation, we could go some distance. But something will be done this year.
So there will be some element, you believe, of campaign finance reform before the elections?
Yes, we will. We expect to. We will have a bill in the Parliament, and we hope that there's something that we could do to improve the process. What exists now is unacceptable, and we would like to do something going into the 2020 election.
Okay. Would you participate in a leaders' debate leading up to the general elections of 2020?
Providing it's properly organized and providing it's a genuine debate. Yeah. Yeah?
Do you think a debate would be beneficial to our democracy? We've tried on several occasions in the past to have one. It unfortunately has not happened.
Of course, a debate is beneficial because it brings information to the population as to what the options are. You see, a lot of people can be very critical of what's in front of us, behaving as though, let's remove it. But then it is to be replaced by something else. Mm-hmm. We're not going to be creating any vacuum. Once we don't do A, there's going to be either B, C, D, or F. And that a debate allows these options to be put on the table. I mean, you hear people talking about unemployment. Okay, how would you create employment in the absence of an ability to fund it? What kind of employment? You hear people talking about the price of food, what the government should do. What do you do that will give us better prices? You talk about production and the role of agriculture. What exactly are you going to produce for export? That's compared to what we are doing now. And that is what would give the population an idea that what is being done now is worthy of support because it's the best option of the many options.
Who are you grooming, Dr. Rowley, as your successor in the party?
I never encourage people in my immediate family to get involved in politics, because I think my involvement in politics is enough for one family, but it doesn't mean that people in my family will never get involved in politics. In terms of grooming, I belong to a political party. This year we're 64 years old, and the grooming will not be done by me, but the organization has provided opportunity for people to enter, to participate, to grow, and to be selected as worthy of advancement towards leadership.
Do you see Stuart Young as a potential successor to you?
Many people who are some are in Parliament, some are not in Parliament. They're all potential successors. Okay.
So that's not a no, but it's not necessarily a yes.
I don't have any selectee, if that's what you mean. Okay. You call Stuart Young's name. I mean, I don't have a selectee. What I will do, though, and what I have been doing along the way, is that I have been blessed with leading a number of young people into the parliamentary arena. And in working with them, managing them, I have given them the benefit of my experience. Some of them have made mistakes, and out of those mistakes they would have learned. And they are now a bit more experienced. And I have guided them in such a way that they can remain useful to the national community. Yeah. That is what I set out to do.
Realistically, what can citizens expect from the Pnm administration heading into 2020? And in the context of the Minister of Finance saying that there can now be a sense of loosening up of the belt that has been tightened for the past 4 years.
Well, what we have done is we started in a very difficult valley. We've been trying to climb out of that. We are still in that situation. We can't spend what we don't have. We could borrow and keep the country going. We've done a fair amount of that. We've been funding a development program, meaning that we are spending money on building things and doing things that we have need for. and create opportunities. But we are focused from day one on ensuring that we provide support for those who are least able to look after themselves. The one area that we have been very good on is that we've maintained the social services program, and we have spent every year approximately $5 billion in that sort of thing, from pensions all the way down to household food card grants and benefits to households for orphans, looking after geriatrics in their home with home care and so on. And we've maintained a health system which, while not being perfect, we've provided it with the resources of personnel, medication, physical environments, so that healthcare can be delivered. Those are the priorities that we are focusing on, ensuring that the population still can hold on to that, while we reduce certain things like subsidies on fuel, which that was an option we had. We spent $4 billion in fuel subsidy in 2015. That was an area that we reduced to half a billion in 2016. It has gone back up to about $1 billion because the price of oil has gone up a little bit. And we have, as a people, to balance these things. And in that balance, in 2020, you can look forward to us ensuring that those who are least able to look after themselves will continue to get government support. Those who are doing well, we support them to continue to do well. And those who have no opportunity, we seek to create opportunities for them to participate and to benefit from.
I know we have to bring this interview to a close very soon, Dr. Rowley. I wanted to just get your feelings towards the performance of some of your ministers and whether or not you were disappointed, for example, in people like Darrell Smith, Marlene MacDonald, the recent situation with Ms. Camille Robinson-Regis. Are you satisfied that she has... Are you satisfied with any explanation that she's given? We also had Mrs. Jennings-Smith in the news recently appearing to barter with food cards, which is something that your administration has vehemently criticized the previous one for.
Oh, well, let me answer the question from the beginning. Yes, I am very disappointed in the outcome of the Darrell Smith situation, and that disappointment resulted in me dismissing him from his ministerial portfolio. And as a young person in the government, we did have high hopes for a better outcome. So yes, I am disappointed with that outcome. With respect to
Ms. MacDonald?
Ms. MacDonald, I am disappointed in that as well. Ms. MacDonald's difficulty, as you may recall, relates to something that happened 3 governments ago under the Manning government. And it was dealt with along the way. It came to a head under my administration, and without hesitation, I've dealt with it as it ought to have been dealt with. And again, that is an element of disappointment. Ms. MacDonald had been quite a good performer in my team. She was the chief whip in opposition. She did a very good job there, and as a minister and an MP in Port-au-Spain South. But there are certain yardsticks that you have to be measured by. And if you fall short on that yardstick, much as you would like to perform in a different way, certain things preclude other things from happening. So there is some disappointment there. But we will get over that in the way that we ought to. And of course,
Mrs.
Robinson-Regis matter. At the time when it came to the fore, information available to me and the responses to it were based on the facts as known to me. If there are others who have other facts, and I'm not here talking about innuendo, and I feel so, and I think so, and it should be so, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the facts of the situation as known to me. I have acted with the same propriety that I've acted with the others. And if it changes at any time, my situation remains the same. We are being measured, especially those of us in the Pnm, we are measured by a standard which we hold ourselves to. So you wouldn't find anybody in the Pnm on a bribery charge and still conducting government business. And of course, with Ms. Jennings-Smith, my understanding is that it's not what you think to be the information about what is food card and what is hamper. I mean, I organize hampers for persons in my constituency. We have different hampers. Some of them we give out to people on basic need as the community identifies. Others we do for party members as part of our outreach to them. In our party, we have a party welfare officer. We have party welfare activities, and I don't want you to mix up government food card with party.
But food card or hamper, the tone of that discussion was along the lines of seeking party support for certain gifts, certain items.
I just said, I didn't understand the conversation to be that you were seeking party support for food cards. I understand that there were hampers. What the MP was saying is that I have organized hampers for my members or my members. That's acceptable. In the Martin West where I operate, in the party does welfare work for party members. But that ought not to be to be confused with government food cards, where food cards are made available, and some food cards are made available, I know at Christmas time, some were made available to MPs across the board. And you give those out to constituents purely on the basis of need, not who they support and who they vote for. Right? That's how it be. So we have to make these distinctions.
Sure.
Right?
And you are satisfied with the performance of your cabinet otherwise?
I think in a very difficult situation, we have done reasonably well.
Do you believe your cabinet has suffered from some inexperience?
Oh yeah, because it was a new government full of new people. If you look at the people in my cabinet, a lot of them were in government for the first time. And when that is so, the learning curve is there. And the same thing with permanent secretaries, you know. I came into government with a team of permanent secretaries, most of them brand new. And many of them have made significant mistakes. But there has to be a learning and a level of tolerance, and of course, you have to crack the whip from time to time to get to a better place. Most of my ministers were first-timers. Some of them first-timers in politics. Eh?
Are we likely to see some of these faces heading into a new cabinet if you're given the opportunity? If some of the faces who are there now, well, I should hope so. Because they're the ones who have taken us through from where we were to where we are, and I think many of them would have done enough to earn a second chance. So we have a screening process, which is quite rigorous in the PNM. Nobody has any automatic claim to a seat or to a place in the cabinet, but we are reasonable and we are reasonable. And I think people will be judged on what they had to deal with and how well they performed. How do you think you'll be judged by Tobagonians? And I raise that because the Sea Bridge has been a particular problem for your administration. It has caused reputational damage, in a sense, to Tobago, to the inter-island transport system. It has gone through a tremendously turbulent time. And it has impacted the business community on the island, among others.
That Sea Bridge thing, a lot of effort was put in by Pnm detractors to make that into a cause célèbre. But it didn't really bruise my back very much because it was largely a dishonest conversation. We came into government meeting the two ferries, the Express and the Spirit, being used to the point they were run to a point where they could no longer be run, and they were not maintained by a previous government. That was our portion. They were forced out of service because of their condition. They couldn't even be insured. So we couldn't use them even if we wanted to. That created, in our term, this problem of not having a proper service, both with respect to the Sea Bridge for passengers and the corruption with the cargo. On the corruption on the cargo side, we have people in court over that. In case you all forget, because I notice you all don't deal with that, there are people in court over the cargo side of that. With respect to the management of the ferry service to Tobago, senior people on the port have been dismissed for falling short of expectation. That happened under this government. And finally, you don't go into the market or in a mall in Miami and get ferries to replace the two that had to come off the service. So for a year and a half, this government was battered for being incompetent and to be uncaring and so on, when the singular solution was to find replacements for those two vessels that our predecessors operated without maintaining them. we had stopgap measures. We had to have stopgap measures. While those stopgap measures were there, we were battered. But today, we ended up with a very good service for passengers by lease vessel, and we have under construction now the solution to the problem, which only this government has brought about, which is to order, build, and buy 2 new vessels. There's no other option better than that, and we have that option on the way.
You've said that you've been unfairly battered in a sense for the Seabridge fiasco.
It was an automatic, everybody jumped on the bandwagon, ferry.
So are you saying,
it was not our doing.
So are you saying that Tobago in particular was not, the Tobago economy, Tobago businesses were not impacted by what took place during that?
It was severely impacted by an action which was not the action of this government. We were the ones required to fix it. And while we were fixing it, those who were guilty of putting us in that situation were leading the charge, as though it was our doing. But I tell you what, we accepted the responsibility. We dealt with the port, we dealt with the individuals who were the poor, who we view were part of the problem, and we've ordered new vessels. Right?
Is there anything you could have done differently in that situation?
Today, we have, how many vessels? We have three passenger ferries going to Tobago and a cargo ferry on a consistent basis. So all those who were talking about the ferry, we were talking about solution.
Is there anything you could have done differently? And tie back to my original question, in terms of, some Tobagonians may say that there's a Tobagonian here in Whitehall and the office of the Prime Minister, and whether or not they've truly benefited from your presence in that position.
There are some things we could have done differently, of course, because the way the board was brutalized, right, by corrupt elements on the port. If we had known what we had known then, when we started to try to solve the problem, we could have protected ourselves a little better from what we experienced during that period, that first year and a half. Of course, one of the other things too was that the removal, the loss of the people who were maintaining the ferry. If we had realized what was happening in that corrupt environment on the port, we could have, I suspect that we might have been able to use bay ferries better to prevent the collapse that had happened. So that is what, but again, hindsight allows us to be able to say that. Right? But in the end, we took the decision that had to be taken, which is to get replacement ferries. Of course, it will take some time, and we are hoping that the schedule that we are contracted to will be kept, and eventually this will be a history that we can walk away from.
After 4 years, what would you say is your greatest failure as a PM, and also your greatest success?
You didn't mention about me as a Tobagonian.
I did.
Whether Tobago had benefited. You know, the people of Tobago are very discerning, and they would have seen what I had to deal with, what my government had to deal with, both in Tobago, for Tobago, and outside of Tobago. And I'm confident that that innate spirit of theirs would allow them to determine that we have made the best options available for and on their behalf, and on the wider national community's behalf.
So finally, what would you consider to be your greatest success as PM so far, and your greatest failure?
Preventing Trinidad and Tobago from collapsing in the period 2015-2016, given where we were on becoming the government of Trinidad and Tobago, I think would be our greatest success. Because I don't know that this country has fully appreciated the bankruptcy that we inherited in 2015. In September 2015, we were running a budget of $60-odd billion of expenditure, with revenues at about $38 billion. That was a recipe for disaster if we had panicked or take bad advice. And that was to me, it is easy to criticize that we are not nirvana and that we are not the best in the world in many areas, but we have evaded worse conditions that many people still don't understand how close we came. We took the decision that while we were an IMF candidate, that we will not take our country down that road, and that we will take our own bitter medicine prescribed for ourselves, by ourselves. And some of that is what is being criticized now, but that is what saved us from a worse situation. We kept the public service in place without following a single gazetted public servant as part of the solution to our difficulties. We paid $5 billion in back pay to public servants in this era. And those are the things that we had to do. And wherever we are now, we are in a better place than if we had not done those things that we had done. And that is the success of my government.
What would you say would be one of your major failures?
That we have not been able to engineer the growth that we anticipated that we should have been having now. But a lot of it has to do with external forces because we are in the external market. For example, we've been budgeting gas at $3 per unit. But because of external forces, the gas, which is our main revenue contributor, is now rooted as just over $2. So whether we like it or not, our main revenue earner in the external market has been there at a low price, about a third of what it, less than a third. We've lost about a third of what we anticipated. You could say we're too reliant on gas, but that is what we have. That's what it is. But what we did do, we had tremendous success in revisiting the energy environment and putting our energy sector in a much better place now than we were in 2015. I am comfortable now that the energy sector in Trinidad and Tobago has a bright future. We're looking at $5 billion US in investments. We are now looking at access to gas fields that we didn't have before. And even though the price is low and the volumes are increasing slowly, we are in a better place in terms of being able to make the most of what is available, even in the difficult market. And we've negotiated better conditions, which will give us the prospect of better earnings going forward.
I'm sure that will be discussed rigorously in the coming days, those final comments. Dr. Rowley, I want to thank you very much for giving me the time to speak to you, and I hope that this is of the benefit to the national audience.
And I want to thank you very much for taking the time to come and talk to us in such a way that our information can be out there to the public, and I hope that we'll continue these discussions both with the media, in the media, and the national community with boundless faith in our destiny. Thank you very much.